In this tutorial, we will focus on text analysis in R. This tutorial is not meant to be a comprehensive tutorial on all types of text analysis. Rather, we will focus on sentiment analysis in this tutorial, and even more specifically on lexicon-based sentiment analysis, which I'll explain in more detail a little bit later on in this tutorial. Now, there are many other types of text analysis we could have done, like natural language processing, computational linguistic approaches, and so forth, and these get much more complicated. And so this is meant to just be an entry point into text analysis. And essentially what we're going to end up doing is running some basic descriptive statistics and using a simple bar chart to visualize some of our data. But our goal here is to take a corpus of text, a block of text, if you will, and we want to try to figure out what is the sentiment or the feeling or the emotion that's being expressed in this text. Now, we could do this qualitatively by having humans review through this, but we have vast amounts of text. We often, and even more today because of our increased computational power and processing speeds, we are now able to do text analysis, and we're getting better and better at being able to tease apart and pulling out meaning, such as sentiment, from our text. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is, since we're in RStudio, let's go to File, New File, RScript to open up our RScript editor window, which if we save it will become our RScript file. I'm going to use a hashtag to make a quick note here that this is text analysis in R, and I'll do another line of annotation here just to note that we are doing a lexicon-based sentiment analysis as a specific type of text analysis here. Now, I do want to point out at this point that there is a great ebook that you can access online, or you can buy it through the publisher O'Reilly, through Amazon, or wherever you get your books. And it's by Silge and Robinson. And part of this tutorial is inspired by one of the chapters from the book, although I do deviate from it and use different data. And introduce some slightly different approaches and functions. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is set our working directory. So I'll make a note, set our working directory. And I'll use the setwd function to do so. The data for this tutorial here, I've saved it in my H drive, our workshop folder. And so I'll run that line there. If you recall, alternatively, you could do session, set working directory, choose directory to select your working directory folder in that way through the drop-downs. Just want to make sure it's the folder that contains the data file for this tutorial. So what is the data file for this tutorial? Well, let's read in the data. And before I say what the name of it is, let's make sure that we've used the install.packages and installed the reader package. If you've recently installed this package, you don't need to do this, or if you've never installed this package, you will need to do this. I have recently updated my reader package, so I'm not going to run that line, but you may need to do that. I will use the library function here with the name of the reader package without quotation marks around it to access the functions within it. And so I just ran that line of script there. And I'm going to be using the read_csv function to read in the .csv file that contains our data. So I'm going to call this data frame object that we're going to assign the data to using the left-handed arrow operator that I just typed there. I'm going to call it db, as you can see there, just to keep it short. And again, I'm using the read_csv function from the reader package that we just accessed using the library function. And so within the quotation marks, I'm going to type in the exact name of the file. It's called SHRM discussion board.csv, where SHRM stands for Society for Human Resource Management. And so these are this is pulled from their discussion board. These are actual reactions that people had to different threads and so forth. And I tried to pick two different threads that seemed to have some sentiment involved with it. It was kind of a more emotional topic or more polarizing topic that people might choose to respond to in a more emotional way. Okay, so make sure you include the .csv in there. Let's go ahead and run that line there. So now we've got our data frame here. Let's take a look at it. So click on the db data frame object we read in. All right, so here you can see we've got the threads. So we've got HR complaint is the name of one of the threads. The other thread is friends at work. And I also created a variable here called post. And the post just refers to it's in order, in numeric order here, where 1 indicates this is the first person's post, 2 means this is the second person, so this is the first reply, in other words, to the person's post to that thread. And so here you just get little excerpts here of what people wrote. If you hover your cursor over, you can see that this person actually has quite a lengthy post here. So as you can see, each post is constrained to a single cell here under the text column. And so these are our 3 variables of interest. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to be installing and accessing some packages that we'll be using here. And so let's just do that in bulk right away. And so the first package that might be new for you is called tidytext, and it works very nicely with the tidyverse series of packages, although it is created by different people. And so what we'll do is, if you haven't already, make sure that you do install.packages function, and within the parentheses and within the quotation marks, type tidytext, all lowercase, and make sure that you run that if you haven't installed it recently. I'm going to copy that 2 more times because we also need to make sure that we have installed the dplyr package, as we'll be using that, as well as the tidier package too. And you know what? Let's go ahead and do the 4th one too. Later on, we'll be using the ggplot2 package as well to do some data visualization. So let's type in ggplot2. So there we're going to, if you haven't already, make sure you use install.packages function to install the tidytext package, the dplyr package, the tidier package, and the ggplot2 package, where the latter 3 all come from the tidyverse. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is, for sure you'll need to use the library function to access each one of these. So let's use library tidytext to access the tidytext. I'm going to copy that 3 more times there, and just copy in dplyr for the second one, tidier for the 3rd one, and ggplot2 for the 4th one. And so I'm going to run all 4 lines there just to have access to all the functions within those packages there. Okay, so then the next or important step we need to do, and this is often the case with text data. Now, in our case, we have a very nice set of text that's already separated such that each post is in a single cell and so forth. But often if we're scraping data, for instance, from a website maybe, then the text might be just a raw, essentially like what a Word document or a text document where there's really no structure to it. So you'd have to add structure. We're not going to be getting into it at that deep a level here in this introductory video to text analysis, but do know that's a big part of text analysis, is managing and structuring your data in a way that you can even do analysis on it. Okay. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to restructure the data frame, or the data within the data frame that we have here called DB. And I'm going to name this new data frame object DB_new. And I'll use a left-handed arrow operator so we can assign the results from this function we're about to run, the data values, to our new data frame object called DB_new. And we're going to use a function called unnest_tokens. Okay. And this is from the tidytext package. The unnest_tokens function refers to the fact that we're going to take our data frame here and see where we have essentially blocks of text here for each cell under the text. So for each case, they have a block of text here, or each observation has a block of text. We want to change this around where we remove the punctuation. We're actually going to make it all lowercase too using this function. And we're going to make it so each row is going to have a single word there, okay? And so we're just going to restructure the data in that way. What this is saying is that we're going to focus on also the token here is the word level. So our unit of analysis we're going to be interested in this tutorial is actually looking word by word what the sentiment is for each one of those words. Now, keep in mind that more nuanced forms and more modern forms of text analysis that are a little bit more complicated to implement, or a lot more complicated to implement in some instances, like natural language processing, are going to take into account more of the sentence structure and the meaning, and can be better at capturing the meaning of phrases, for instance, instead of just single words. And why might this be important? Well, if, for instance, we have the word happy, Okay, well, that's obviously a positive sentiment there that's being communicated. But what we might be losing out if we're just going word by word is that what if not precedes happy? So it's not happy. Well, that actually means the opposite of, not the opposite of happy, but it means a negative sentiment. Okay, and so that's one of the shortcomings or limitations of using this approach that we're doing here today. Yet this approach is very efficient, and it can maybe get us ballpark what the overall sentiment is within a whatever unit of text we're interested in. Okay, so what's the first argument we're going to use? We'll type TBL for table, and this is just where we're going to enter in the name of our data frame object, which is DB. So TBL equals DB, and then we have our input. And so this is going to be the variable that we're going to use as input that we are going to unnest. Okay, and that's going to be our text variable with a capital T. So this one, we're going to unnest this variable. And then our third argument, we're going to do output equals. We are going to type word. And I'm just going to put this all lowercase because this will come in handy later, because one of the existing dictionaries we're going to use already calls the column that contains the words word lowercase. Okay, and so here we have word, and so this is going to be our output here. All right, so the next thing we can do is run that line there. Now you'll see we have a new data frame here. And note that we originally had 46 rows here, or 46 entries. Now we have 4,395. Why is that? Well, as you can see, we removed all the punctuation. Everything's lowercase now. And now we have word by word by word, where each word gets its own row here. Okay? All right, so the next thing that we will do is we are going to create a data frame with what are called stopwords. Okay, stopwords are words that just don't, they're really common words in the English language like and, but, the definite articles, the indefinite articles like the and a, that don't necessarily add meaning in terms of sentiment here. And so we're going to identify what those are, pull them up, and create a data frame, so then subsequently we can remove those from our db_new data frame object we've created here. Okay, so let's come up with a name for our data frame object here that we're going to assign the stopwords to, and let's call this stp_wrds stopwords. So removing all the vowels there. We're going to use the left-handed arrow to assign what is going to be the result of this function, which is called get stopwords. Okay, and this is a function from the tidytext package. So it's get_stopwords, and it'll be really simple. We just have a single argument. We'll say source equals, and then in quotation marks, all lowercase, smart. Now, alternatively, we could have put snowball here. Smart tends to be a more expansive dictionary of stopwords. And so we'll go ahead and use this one here. So let's go ahead and run that line of script there. Now we have a new data frame here that's called stp_wrds. And so here we have word. Okay, so this column contains the stop words. So also, anybody. So as you can see, these don't necessarily convey any sentiment here. So we're just going to go ahead and remove them. And then it gives you a column with a character constant here, which is just smart. And so that's not super meaningful here, but it just reminds us that all of these words are from the smart lexicon there of stop words. Okay, so now that we have that data frame object that contains the stop words, we're ready to then essentially do a match. So match those words with our existing data frame and then remove them. So now we get to do something that's pretty fun. And so we're going to remove the stop words, and it's a function from the dplyr package. I love the name. I love the concept. Something funny about anti-join. Reminds me of like antimatter or something like that. But what we're going to be doing with an anti-join is removing any rows that are in common between these two data frames here. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and just override our existing data frame of interest here, which is db_new. So let's put that and assign the result of this anti-join, those values to this data frame object. This is going to overwrite our existing data frame object called db_new. And so again, it's called the anti-join function from the dplyr package. And the first thing we're going to do is let's type in one of the names of our data frame objects. So we'll do the db_new because we want to remove any stop words such as and here. We'd want to remove this row because this isn't adding value there. It doesn't convey a sentiment. Okay, so that's our first data frame name. And then we're going to do stp_wrds, which is the name of the data frame that we named just a moment ago. Okay. And then how are we going, what is the key variable here that we're going to match on? Well, let's do by equals to note what that's going to be. And it's the word variable here. Okay, so both of these have word all lowercase. Okay, and remember we did that intentionally earlier on. We called it word lowercase when we were unnesting the tokens here or unnesting the words and restructuring the data so that it would be remove a step. We wouldn't have to rename it in the before running the anti-join function here. All right, so now we are ready to run that line. Oops, looks like I forgot to run that. Oh, I missed a underscore there with the anti-join function. So there we go. So it's anti_join. That's from the dplyr package. And so now we should be able to check out. You can see that we've gone down. We have many fewer observations now. What was it, like 4,000 something before? Now we're 1,500 and some change. And so now you can see we have just those words that are a little bit more meaningful for us that will be more likely to pull meaning instead of being not filler, but just being those common words that don't convey much in terms of semantic meaning. All right, so the next thing that we will do is we're going to actually do our sentiment analysis, and we're going to do so with what's called the Bing lexicon or Bing dictionary, however you want to call it. And so this is an existing lexicon that exists where it has a whole dictionary of words and they're assigned sentiments. In this case, it's dichotomous. A word, if it's included in this dictionary, is either is labeled as positive or negative. Okay, it doesn't contain every word. It only contains the words that it's designated as being positive or negative. Okay, so we are going to need to bring in this dictionary. So let's call it Bing, all lowercase, just to keep things simple here and remind us what that is. And we'll use the function called get_sentiments from the tidytext package. So here's another great function from that package. And we will type in lexicon equals as our sole and only argument. And within the quotation marks, just type in Bing. So this is the name of the dictionary here. There's another dictionary or lexicon called AFINN. We're not going to get into that one. We're going to use Bing in this video tutorial. If you want to learn about the AFINN, it has a polarity scores, ranges from -5 to +5 for words, where if it's more positive, it means that it's a more positive sentiment. If it's a more negative value, it means a more negative sentiment. A little bit more nuance there. I go into detail in the corresponding written tutorial for this text analysis in R tutorial that we're going over right now. So do check that out if you want to learn more about that other dictionary. Okay, so let's get the sentiments. Let's bring in this lexicon here and name it Bing. Okay, so let's take a peek here in our global environment. Click on that new data frame object called Bing. And here you can see we're bringing in, remember this has nothing to do with what we already have in our data frame here. This is just bringing it in. This is the dictionary of words. And you can see here it has the sentiment column, which contains either negative or positive, and the word. And you can see there's 6,788 entries here, so 6,788 words that are positive or negative. And so you can see abolish has a negative sentiment, A+ has a positive sentiment, and so forth. Now, I will give you a heads up that this dictionary will contain words that are going to be, some of which might be jarring to see. They might be, in terms of being either not provocative is not the right word, but just being not necessarily something that we would use in general society today. With that said, these dictionaries are meant to be, or this lexicon is meant to be expansive. So imagine you're a researcher who's doing research on a hate group's message board or something like that. Well, you could still capture the sentiment based on some of the words that they're using that are slurs and things like that. So again, if you did scroll through this, you would find some of those words. Okay, so just a heads up on that. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a join of our data frames. So we're going to join the Bing lexicon, or this dictionary, that data frame, with our existing data frame, which is the db_new. Okay, and this time we are going to create a new data frame object. Let's call it db_Bing. I'm creating a lot of data frame objects here, which is not necessarily the most elegant way to do this, but it is a way, I think, when we're explaining things to make it a little bit more clear what's going on here. So we'll call this new data frame object db_Bing. We're going to use the left-handed arrow operator to assign the values of a join to this data frame object. We're going to use the inner_join, which is an inner join from the dplyr package, which simply means that we're going to be retaining only those observations for which we have a match, okay, between the two data frames, and everything else gets excluded. So in other words, we're only going to be matching the words from the db_new data frame that match with a word in the Bing dictionary or lexicon that we just read in. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the first data frame. It's fairly arbitrary which one you put here. Let's do db_new as our first argument. Second argument, let's do the Bing data frame that we read in here and named just a moment ago. And then we need to indicate what our keyword is using by equals, and it's going to be word. Okay, just word singular, because that is the key variable that both of these data frames have in common here. Word all lowercase. Okay, and let's go ahead and click run. Let's click on db_Bing. And now you'll see we have 298 observations, or in other words, we retain 298 words here across the different threads and posts. So now the next step is that we are going to compute counts of the sentiments, so positive or negative, by thread and by post. Okay, so we're going to nest posts within thread, and we're going to try to get a sense for, well, how many positive versus negative words were expressed in each post that's within each thread here. Okay, so we're going to drill down or segment to that level. So let's make a note, we're going to compute the sentiment counts by thread and by post. Okay, and so to do so, we're going to use the count function from dplyr. And let's go ahead and this is maybe not what you necessarily want to do in all instances, but in this instance, let's do it. We're going to overwrite the existing db_Bing data frame object we just created above. And essentially what we're doing is we're just aggregating to the thread and post level here. And you'll see what this looks like in a second. It'll probably be a little bit clearer once you see the end product. So we're going to use that count function that comes standard with the dplyr package. And as the first argument, let's type the name of our new data frame object, which is db_Bing. And as our second argument, type the names of the variables that you wish to segment by. So let's do thread and then post. And then the last argument is going to be the name of the variable, okay? And so if you look at our db_Bing, we now have this sentiment column here, sentiment being all lowercase, name for our variable there. We are going to use that as what we're going to be counting here. So we're going to be counting the instances of positive and negative within each post that's within each thread, okay? And so let's go ahead and click run there. And so now we've overwritten the existing db_Bing data frame. You can see now we're down to 74 rows there. Let's take a look and see what we have here. And so what we've created is now we have the threads, so friends at work, and now you'll see that each post, it'll have either 1 or 2 rows here, and that corresponds to negative and positive. But notice that friends at work post 2 here only has one row, and that's because apparently there was no negative words there. So we'll need to address that a little bit on. What we need to do now is actually restructure the data such that we're going to spread or go from long to wide format, where we'll have negative and positive will have their own columns, okay? And so that's going to be the next step here. But what we're doing is we're in the process of restructuring our data even further. And so this is really what we call manipulating the data, or in this case, we're spreading the data, which coincides to the name of the function. So we're going to spread data frame from long to wide format. Okay. And so what we're going to be using is the spread function from the tidyr or tidyr, depending on how you want to say it, function or package, which is from the tidyverse universe of packages. And so this may not be what you always want to do, but in this case, we're going to overwrite our existing data frame, the db_bing, using the left-handed arrow operator there. And the name of the function from tidyr is spread, all lowercase. And this is a little bit challenging to wrap it sometimes initially if you've never manipulated data in this way, to wrap our minds around this. But there's really just a few arguments that we need here in this relatively simple data frame. So the first thing we need to specify is key equals, and this is the name of the variable, which in this case is going to be sentiment. Okay, so if we look here, sentiment. And this is the variable that we are going to spread. So this is our key variable that we're going to spread. Okay. And so it means something different than key in the context, a key variable in the context of a join or a merge, for instance. And then the next thing that we need to do is designate, okay, what's the value going to be? What's the variable? And so we'll do value equals. What's the value variable going to be? Well, that's going to be our in variable here, which was created by default. It's lowercase in, which is just the count, okay? So what this is going to do, so for each post, so once we restructure the data, each post will only have a single row here. And then you'll have positive and negative, and the counts will be moved, which is here in, will become the values underneath that. So we're designated which variable actually contains the values of interest here. Okay, and so we're going to say in lowercase because that's the name of that variable in this particular data frame. The next thing we're going to say is fill equals 0. And so the reason we need to designate fill equals 0 is that you look here, and as I mentioned before, for instance, post 2 from the friends at work thread only has a single row because apparently there's no negative words. Well, we want to make sure that we retain the structure by saying, okay, in this case, if it's missing negative, it actually means that there's 0 negative words there. So 0 has a meaning here, okay? So we're going to say fill with 0 here. And then finally, we are going to do data equals and the name of our data frame object from which these two variables come from, and this is the data frame object that we are going to manipulate and spread here. So this is db_bing, and let's go ahead and run that chunk of code there, that chunk of script. And let's take a look now at our data frame object called db_bing. All right, so now you see that we have each post within each thread has just a single row here. And so you can see the friends at work thread, the first post had 4 what were designated as negative words and 10 positive. Okay, so you can see that this seems to be more positive than negative, at least according to this coding approach that we're using here with our sentiment, lexicon-based sentiment analysis. And then here's that 0 when we said fill equals 0. Because there was no negative row, because there was just no negative words apparently, we've gone ahead and filled that in so that we now have, at least can designate or notate here as a value that there were 0 negative words and there were 2 positive words for the second post made in the friends at work thread there. Right, so now we are ready to actually create a sentiment variable here. I mean, you could leave it like this if you just wanted to know how many negative versus positive words are there, but often we go a step further and create something, a single variable that's going to convey what the overall sentiment is. And there's different ways that you could do this and calculate this. we are just going to do a very simple subtraction here. This isn't necessarily the most elegant way to do it, but it's a simple one intuitively to understand. And so we're going to create a sentiment variable. This is actually a new sentiment variable in this case, because we actually already have that existing one in our data frame here, or we did have it at least a second ago before we spread the data from long to wide. But now we're going to add it back in here, and it's going to have a different meaning here. So what we're going to do is we're going to overwrite our existing data frame, so db underscore Bing first, and then the left-handed arrow operator to assign the new data frame values to this data frame object that will replace the existing db underscore Bing. And we're going to use the mutate function from the dplyr package. And this is a function you can use to create new variables by applying different operations or basic arithmetic and so forth, or even other functions to transform a variable or transform data and create a new variable based on that. And so let's call this new variable, as I mentioned, sentiment, all lowercase. So sentiment equals, okay, so how are we going to, what is going to tell us what that sentiment variable actually equals? Well, as I mentioned, let's just do basic subtraction. So positive minus negative. Where did I get that? Well, if you look at the data frame object here, so for each person, or not each person, but each thread by post, we'll do 4 minus 10, so, or rather the opposite, so it's positive minus negative, so it'll be 10 minus 4. So that would be a sentiment score of 6 if you imagine a new column here, and we'd go down the list there, which is exactly what we're going to be doing here, okay? And we do need to note here, as part of the mutate function, I'm going to actually bring this down to a new row here. I am going to do dot data. So note that there is a period here. We need to do that in this particular case. So dot data, okay, equals, and what is the name of the data frame object to which the positive and negative variables belong? Well, it's db underscore Bing. Okay, we just saw that a second ago. There it is. Okay, so let's run that. Now let's take a look at our data frame object again. Okay, now we have a new column or variable called sentiment. And so as I showed before, positive minus negative, 6 for this first post and thread, 2 for this next one, and so forth and so on. You can scroll through. And so a negative score would mean that it overhauls a more negative sentiment. All right, so we've done all that. This could be where you want to stop. You could compute a mean, for instance, of just overall, like if you look across all these threads here. So for instance, let's just do a basic mean using the mean function from base R, and db Bing underscore Bing is the name of our data frame. Our new variable is called sentiment. That's numeric, quantitative in nature. And then let's do na.rm equals true, which won't be an issue here because I don't think we have any missing data, or we wouldn't have any missing data here. And so we're just going to calculate the overall mean for this column here. Let's click run. Okay, it's 1.636. Okay, so overall you could say, well, maybe we have kind of a slightly positive sentiment here across the two threads and the various posts within those threads. But often a nice way to work with text data, or any data for that matter, is to do some kind of data visualization. So let's now do a data visualization. And I'll make a note that specifically we're just going to do bar charts here, okay? And so we're going to visualize for each thread overall what is the sentiment, and we'll actually drill down to the post level initially too. And then we'll back up at the final step and just look thread by thread. So there's 2 threads here. We'll create 2 bar charts. Okay, so this is where we're going to use that ggplot2 package that we read in, or that we accessed earlier using the library function. And do note that the ggplot2 functions, it's an amazingly robust approach to personalized data visualizations. You can do a whole lot in terms of formatting and so forth and stylistic things, but it does involve an introduction of a lot of new functions if you've never used this before, but it's quite powerful. So the first function we're going to use is just called ggplot. And this is simply where we kind of set up the coordinates and kind of the style of the parameters of our bar chart, or what will be our bar chart. At this point, we're not even saying it's a bar chart. We're just saying what's on our x-axis, what's on our y-axis, and also is there a third categorical variable that we're going to be using here as well. And we're going to use within it a function that's called AES, which stands for aesthetic mappings. And then we'll do parentheses. And as the first argument in the AES, the aesthetics mapping function, we're going to do x equals. And just what variable do we want to put on our x-axis? Well, let's put post on our x-axis, where this is the discussion post here. Okay, because we're going to see these sequentially is what's going to happen. As our second argument, let's do y equals. And which variable do we want on our y-axis? Let's do sentiment. Okay, so this is going to be the height of the bars here. So that's the name of the variable, sentiment. Okay, so we've got post and sentiment. Now we're also going to do fill equals and thread. Okay, because we're interested in doing this not just by post, but post within thread, and there are two threads here. So the default would be, and we're going to actually correct this in a few steps later here, the default is going to be that this would make a stacked bar chart, okay, where thread would be, the fill would be the color. There'd be two colors within each bar, and that would be the respective proportions or counts, okay? So the next argument we're going to do is specify the name of the data frame to which all of these variables belong, and that's the db_Bing data frame there. And now we're going to use a plus sign outside of the function parentheses for the ggplot function. Now, this plus sign is kind of akin to the idea of a pipe from the tidyverse. So if you've worked with dplyr before, a pipe is this symbol here. Okay, it's kind of the same thing, but what we're doing is just literally we're adding features to our plot. So you can think of it, we're just building a plot here. And so each time we add a new function that does a new operation, we're just saying add that to the existing thread, and then it'll run it all at once. Okay. Okay, so now on the next line, we're going to specify, well, what type of data visualization is this? And remember, we want to do a bar chart. So let's do geom call. Okay, which is ggplot2 way of saying this is going to be a column bar graph. Okay, we're going to create columns here, in other words. And as the argument here, we are going to do show.legend equals and just false. Okay, and the reason we're going to do this is that we don't want to show a legend here, and we don't want to show the legend, would be, if we kept this in its original format, it'd be which color designates which level of the thread variable, which in this case, the thread would be friends at work versus, what was the other one? HR complaint, okay? So we're going to say, let's bypass that here. This would also be where you would specify any color, and we'll do that a little bit later on with another bar chart. So we're going to add a plus sign here. So now we've further refined. We've said now, okay, this is going to be a bar chart here using that geom_call function there from ggplot2. And now is where we're going to specify that, hey, we don't actually want a stacked bar chart. We want to have two separate bar charts, one for each thread. In this case, we just have two levels to the thread variable, friends at work, and HR complaints. Okay, so we're going to use what's called the facet wrap function from ggplot2. Then within it, we're going to use the vars function from ggplot2. And just note as the sole argument there that the variable is going to be thread. So this is the one we're going to wrap. And what that means is we're going to say, okay, split this into multiple plots here. Okay. So the next argument within facet wrap is going to be inCall equals. Okay, and so this is going to say, okay, let's make these all on the same line. In other words, so two columns. So the bar charts will be side by side. If we made this inCall equals 1, they'd be on top of each other in a single column. And then we are going to do the third and final argument that we're going to use here, which is scales equals. And then we're going to do we're going to enter the argument free_x. And what this is simply saying is that we're going to allow the x-axis, the values, to be different between the two plots, which is important here because you'll see that we have an unequal number of posts. So we have 22 posts for the friends at work thread, and we have 23 for the HR complaint. Okay. And so we want to note that, hey, it's okay for these two bar charts we're creating, one for each thread, to have different x-axis lengths here. Okay, now we're ready to do another plus sign. And the next thing that we're going to do is the labs function from ggplot2. And this is simply where we just specify, okay, what do we want to label the x and y axis? Like what, we know what the variables are going to be, but is there a more informative way that we can label these? So let's do x equals, and in quotation marks, we can put whatever we want. Let's say post number, okay, is going to be on our x-axis instead of just using the default, which would be the name of the post variable there. And y equals, let's just say that's going to be sentiment, just to convey that that is the sentiment that's being expressed, which will be the height of the bars that we're creating. Okay, let's do another plus sign. And then finally, we're going to do a completely optional thing, but I think this looks nice. There are a series of different functions within the ggplot2 package that kind of do some overarching color themes and tidy themes and stuff in terms of whether or not you have grid lines and so forth. I think one of the most clean looking is what's called theme_classic. And if you look down here, you can see this is a whole set of them that you could play around with there. But I like theme_classic there. And you don't need to put anything in the parentheses here, no arguments. And this will get us started with, let's take a look and see what this actually looks like here. So I'm going to run this whole chunk here. Okay, so here is our plot. I'm going to zoom out here. All right, so what do we have here? Well, we have the two bar charts. Remember, this is one for each thread. So we've got the Friends at Work thread, we've got the HR complaint thread, and then we have the post numbers here. So these are the posts ranging from 1 to, I think, 22 or 23 for each one of them. And so you can see the overall sentiment, which remember is positive words minus negative words per each post within each thread. And so here you can kind of see that it's kind of up and down, but not overall for the Friends at Work thread. There isn't any posts, or there's only a couple posts that have a somewhat negative sentiment to them. We do get more variability here, it appears, with the HR complaint. And you'll see that we have some people with some, here this person's post seems overwhelmingly positive here. It has a positive value. This person's pretty negative down here. And so you can kind of get an idea across, this is actually across time here because these posts were happening one after another. Just how maybe sentiment changed and morphed here. Okay, but what if we want to back up and just do a simple bar chart? We have one bar for the Friends at Work thread in terms of its sentiment and one for HR complaint. Well, I'm going to show you a little bit more of an elegant, efficient way that we can do pretty much everything we did above before we got to the data visualization in a single step using the pipe, okay, which I mentioned just a second ago, which is it's from the McGritter package, but the dplyr and the tidyverse packages are built on that and allow us to pipe objects or the results of different operations from one function to the next. Okay, so let's do just by thread. Let's segment just by thread. The thread variables. So you remember earlier on here, we computed the sentiment counts by thread and by post. So post nested within thread. Now we're just going to back up, just look at the thread level, ignore post, okay? And what we're going to do is let's just override, this may not be what you always want to do, but let's overwrite the existing data frame name, which we've been using, which is db_Bing. And then we'll do the left-handed arrow to assign the values to this data frame that we're going to result from this series of operations that we're about to do. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to back up. If you remember way back when, we had our db_new data frame here. This is when we unnested the text column. And so instead of being blocks of text, it was word by word in terms of each row has just a single word. We're going to back all the way up there. Okay, so we're going to put db_new as the name of the data frame that we are going to then pipe using the percentage greater than or less than, depending on how you're looking at that, percentage sign there. So this is our pipe. And on the same line or another line, we are going to then do an inner join. So this is just quickly going through some of the steps that we did above. And we're going to name what's our first data frame. Well, it's the Bing lexicon data frame. or that's really rather our second one, because here we're piping this data frame db_new, okay, where word is going to be our key variable here, and Bing is what we're going to be doing a join with here. And word is also, as you can see, the key variable there. And so Bing second argument is by equals, and this is where we put in quotes the name of the key variable, which is word here. And we're going to do another pipe here, pipe the result. So now we've piped this data frame to the inner join function here. And then we're piping the result of that to the spread function from the tidyr or tidyr function, or tidyr package. So the spread function from the tidyr package. And we need to specify our key variable, which is going to be sentiment. Okay, so if you remember, this is the key variable was resulted, I guess we've lost it here, but this, you're not gonna be able to see it in here, but if you go back up to the previous steps, you'll be able to see it. But sentiment, that's going to be resulting from this join that we're doing here. We'll have this key variable here, and we're gonna spread it out. So instead of it being positive and negative in a single column as the values for the sentiment variable, we're going to spread the sentiment variable out. So now there will be a positive column and a negative column in terms of the variables. So we're setting that key there. And then we're going to specify the name of the value variable, which is going to be n. So if you recall earlier, there's as part of these operations, there will be a new column called n. And then we will do fill equals 0. Okay. And the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to pipe that to the mutate function. And we're going to create a new variable called sentiment equals. And this is where we're just going to do positive minus negative here. So those variable names. Okay. So that's what's happening here behind the scenes. So let's click run. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to add this row here. I forgot to do the count function here. So we are going to count. Remember, we need to actually, this is part before we actually spread. We are going to do threads. So before we had thread and post, and here we're just piping this in, so we don't need to put the name of the data frame here. So thread, and what's the name of the variable that we're going to be counting? It's sentiment. And let's do a pipe here. Now let's try this. Okay, so there we go. So this is a more elegant way of doing this. Again, you have to know, kind of mentally envision what's happening behind the scenes here in terms of coming up with some of these variable names. So you don't need to do it this way. You could do it the step-by-step way that we've done up here, but it's completely up to you, whatever you're most comfortable with. And so, okay, so let's take a look and see our db_Bing data frame now. Okay, so see how we've restructured this? Now we have the overall sentiment for Friends at Work thread and the overall sentiment for HR complaint thread. And so you can see it's higher, it's a more positive sentiment. There's more positive words relative to negative words in the Friends at Work thread than the HR complaint. This is completely descriptive here. We could also, the resulting data frames here, we could also pump these into other types of inferential statistics if we want to do hypothesis testing and so forth, but we're purely describing what we see here. Okay, so let's finish up by doing a bar chart, much like we just did above. And in fact, let's just go ahead and copy this chunk here, and we'll just adapt it to make it work for what we're doing here. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is now as you can see, we don't have a post variable anymore here. Okay, so instead we're gonna say the x-axis variable is gonna be thread. The y-axis variable is gonna be sentiment for this ggplot function here. And we don't need this fill equals thread because we just have two variables we're really interested in here. And the name of the data frame is db_Bing. That's what we overwrote here a second ago. We are still going to be doing the geom_column to say that this is a bar chart. We're going to still do show.legend equals false argument. We don't want a legend variable. It wouldn't make sense here in this context either because we just have the two variables, thread and sentiment, that we're plotting here. But let's go ahead and do another argument here, and let's do fill equals. And let's just put in quotation marks the name of a color, a known color to ggplot2. Dodger blue happens to be one of them. I like this shade of blue here, this hue of blue. So let's put that there. This is going to make the bars, the two bars, the color blue. Okay. All right, so we will next need to do the, we actually don't need to do the facet wrap here because we're just going to put, we don't have side-by-side bar charts anymore. We're just going to have a single bar chart. So we can get rid of that function there. And so now we have the labs function here, which is where we can specify what we want to label the X and Y axes. And so I'm going to put thread in quotation marks here for the X axis, X equals, and just keep Y equals to sentiment here. That seems like a good enough name for the Y axis. And I'm going to keep the last function here, which is theme underscore classic. And so let's go ahead and run that. Okay, so now we have the bar chart here, and this just visualizes what we saw a second ago, but it's a nice little visual in terms of Friends at Work seems to have a more positive sentiment here than the HR complaint. Okay, again, you could argue that this way of operationalizing sentiment might not be the best, which I would probably agree with you, but it's a good way of starting to think about, well, how would we calculate sentiment? Okay, and so here we have positive minus negative words. There's other ways that we could do this as well. Okay, again, this tutorial is just meant to scratch the surface, and hopefully this does give you somewhat of an idea of where we can go with text analysis, especially if you have survey data, open-ended survey questions and items on a survey. This can be a really efficient way to at least get a feel for, if you use a lexicon-based sentiment analysis, how do people feel when they were responding to this question? If it's an emotionally, or you suspect it's an emotionally valenced topic. All right, well, this wraps up the tutorial called Text Analysis.